Hey, this is former Blue Devil O-lineman Matt Skura. You're listening to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. Go Duke, go ACC.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. My name's Joey Weaver, continuing the team preview series as we look ahead to the 2025 season. Joined today, once again, friend of the program, Will Qualkinbush, host of 105.5 The Roar there in Clemson, South Carolina, here to talk about the Tigers. Qualk, welcome back. Good to have you. How you been?
I've been really good, Joey. It's great to be here again. This is one of those markers, man. When you guys hit me up and say, hey, you want to come on? I know it's close to the season, and we're still, life's starting to get a little better and a little busier. So that's good. Hope you're doing well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a busy summer, but excited to get into football season here. And yeah, it's the most wonderful time of the year, getting ready to get into the season, as it were. We enter year, I've lost count at this point with Dabo Swinney. He's become a real stalwart there at Clemson. He's probably the longest tenured coach there in history, if I had to imagine at this point.
Frank Howard was there for a long time. I think Coach Howard's got him by a few years, but in the modern era, yeah. I mean, listen, one of the things, and we weren't really going to talk about this, but I will say it. I grew up in Clemson in the 90s, and that was right after the 80s. And so, of course, the aura of Danny Ford was everywhere. Like, he would show up around town and things like that. And so, like, Coach Ford was an icon, and he was at Clemson, I think, 12 years, 11 years, something like that. And that seems like a long, long time. And now, I mean, Dabo's getting ready. 2009 was his first full season, so he's getting ready to start his 17th year as the full-time coach. So, like you said, modern era-wise, other than Danny Ford, Clemson's been a place where you come and hang out for, 5 to 8 years probably, and win or don't win. I mean, nobody's left since Charlie Pell left for Florida before Danny Ford in the 70s. So it's not really just a hop, skip, and a jump onto the next job. But yeah, the longevity of Dabo is quite interesting, and he still is he's incredibly vibrant, energetic, as you can imagine, but he's also sort of started to, I would say, I think he understands his podium and his platform as one of the tenured coaches, not just in the ACC, but in the entire country. And so, he's more measured with his words sometimes, and even when he's not, you can tell that he understands the gravity of what he's saying. And I think he does a really good job of balancing that.
Well, and he's a guy that's been pretty outspoken in terms of kind of this changing world of college football the last number of years, with all the things that have changed and how he feels about it. And really, and a lot of times it's gone against kind of his worldview of what the right way to go about the sport would be. And it's kind of he's kind of unique in that way. I think he's more outspoken than a number of coaches, and he's kind of got a unique approach, really. And for a number of years, Dabo did not really bring much in from the outside in terms of the coaching staff, in terms of still kind of limited on transfer portal. We'll get there in a minute. But I did want to ask you, Qualt, because that has been a noted change that we've seen from Dabo the last couple of years, is the way that he has built this coaching staff, where, again, he brought in Chad Morris all those years ago to be the offensive coordinator. He brought in Brent Venables, but ever since then, basically any of their assistants, it was all kind of homegrown stuff. And even replacing them, it was a homegrown effort for a while. Now, the last couple of years, he's brought in Garrett Riley for the last 2 years as offensive coordinator. He's now brought in Tom Allen as his defensive coordinator. And I believe it was before last year, he brought in Matt Luke as his offensive line coach. And for my money, you look at the assistants on any coaching staff, those are probably your three most critical, most important coaching positions, being your offensive, defensive play callers and your offensive line coach. I guess talk about, is there any big shift here, or is this just a realization from Dabo that we just need to get some more outside experience in, as he's kind of slowly changing the philosophy of how maybe the program is run, but really not nearly as quick as other people seem to have kind of adjusted their approach?
It's a good question. I would say it's complicated. There's a lot of factors. one of the things that people have to understand is Dabo Swinney did this on purpose. There's this idea that maybe, it's just, glad handing, backslapping, good old boy stuff at play. That's not really. I think that's almost like insulting to Dabo. Like he has talked about this, that he wanted this. This is a number of years ago now. He wanted the program to sort of be self-perpetuating. He wanted to almost run it like a small business, like a really successful small business where somebody leaves and you've groomed the next guy in your building. And so that keeps continuity. It keeps everything fresh. It keeps your roster stable because you don't have guys leaving because of the system's wildly different and things like that. And then you also are able to, I mean, for lack of a better term, like I won't say like cutting cost or anything like that, but you're not having to go get in bidding wars with assistant coaches and things like that. It's like the perfect storm. And so when he starts doing this, it leads to, well, first of all, he did it the day he got hired. He fired Rob Spence, the offensive coordinator, and he promoted Billy Napier to a position coach. And then he ends up letting Billy Napier be his offensive coordinator. Billy Napier was Dabo's GA when he gets the interim job. He brought on Tony Elliott, who is one of his receivers. And now Tony had a little bit of experience, but Jeff Scott was another one. Jeff Scott was somebody that he brought on board like that. And so like you had these opportunities where he's hiring guys that were beneath him that ended up working out. So you can't blame him for thinking, well, this is just going to continue to work. Like Jeff Scott created one of the best receiver rooms in the country, and then was a co-OC with Tony Elliott that won 2 national championships. And so, you've got this system that does appear to be self-perpetuating to a degree. I think one of the issues is that a lot of people left in a very short amount of time after lots of continuity on staff was able to build over a period of years. So you had Thomas Austin, the old offensive line coach. You had C.J. Spiller. You had Wes Goodwin, the defensive coordinator. You had Tyler Grisham, the wide receivers coach. And then you have some other guys who, like Lemansky Hall was a guy that Dabo had played with at Alabama, who was like at a private school in Tennessee, who came in. Like none of these hires, I think, by themselves would have been like terrible hires. But when you do them all at once, you really are shrinking your margin for error significantly. You could probably bring up one of those guys on either side of the ball, but I think you need some credibility. The credibility that Dabo built was 6 consecutive playoff berths, and you're winning championships all the time. And so like he could go toe to toe with SEC programs because he could show a little bit of a different path, that holistic approach. We're going to treat their hearts first and things like that, not their talents, I think is what he said. Treat the hearts, not the talents. And so that was kind of a big deal. Now, when the transfer portal comes along, when NIL comes along, and when Clemson is not winning as much, then you don't have as many trump cards to play. And so you're getting out recruited by, not just the big boys, but like Tay Harris. I mean, I'm talking last year specifically, but like Tay Harris flips to Georgia Tech, and I think dollar signs were a big part of that. Bryce Davis flips to Duke. I think dollar signs were a big part of that. Not that Clemson's going on the cheap, but the way they've regimented their roster is, Kirby Smart's a similar way at Georgia. They're going to pay their guys, but they're not going to let freshmen come in and be the highest earners on the team necessarily. And so there's this, and obviously for a program like Georgia Tech, Duke, for other programs in the league, you can sort of afford to overpay those top 10 to 15 guys as you're trying to build the top of your roster. I think that's a good way of managing resources. So I'm not casting aspersions at that, but it does cause you to question, okay, how many times can we sort of have this foundation that we built get chipped away? We don't have the experienced assistants. We don't have the steady quarterback play. We can't recruit like we want. We've got commitments to leave in left and right. I think they had a half dozen in the last class. And so you've sort of, over a period of years, guys can leave whenever they want. So the holistic stuff, sometimes guys will leave before you can even get to that. So how do we sort of combat that part of it? And so Dabo underwent a process. And at the beginning of it, when he started to change out his staff, and he brought on Nick Eason, he brought on some outside guys, like you say, brought on Garrett Riley. I'm going, okay, this is going to be like a 3-year transition where Dabo's going to realize, look, we can't do it this way. He had his hands in way too many cookie jars. He was doing way too much stuff, and the little things in the program were falling through the cracks because he was sort of micromanaging everything. And so if you look across the board. You mentioned Matt Luke. Matt Luke, one of the best hires in the history of Clemson football. What he's done with the offensive line group he has now, what he's done on the recruiting trail, better recruiting class on the offensive line coming in 26 than really any in Clemson history. If you look at it on paper, especially in the modern recruiting era, Garrett Riley, what he's done with Cade Klubnik and Christopher Bazina and that offense, you can see obviously the handprints and the footprints there. And then, on the defensive side, I mentioned Nick Eason. He brought Chris Rumpf back, a guy that worked for Dabo and left, went to Alabama, went to several different places in the NFL. He brings him back, has a wealth of experience there. And then, I talked about the micromanaging. It was clear that Dabo was micromanaging the defense at times last year in the play calling, and he was in more defensive huddles. He was doing a lot of that. And so that's sort of the first step when you start to see, okay, Dabo understands there's a problem. He's going to fix this. And so before the world was sort of down on Wes Goodwin, I would say like a lot of us in Clemson were getting the returns. And then, the South Carolina game goes like it goes. The Louisville game where they couldn't stop a nosebleed. They gave up 300 yards rushing to the Citadel. I know it's an option team, but that's not okay. They get absolutely kicked in the teeth by Texas. I think the decision was made before that, but that first half of the Texas game was like watching Clemson in the Citadel, except Clemson was the Citadel up front. I mean, with Peter Woods and TJ Parker, you're just getting absolutely manhandled across the front. Dabo wasn't going to do that. Now, I've got family in Indiana. We root for the Hoosiers. I'm a big Tom Allen guy. So when the defensive coordinator job comes open, I'm going, Dabo calls Tom Allen on the phone. I don't know if he's available, 1 year at Penn State, all that stuff. But if he calls him, he's taking the job because in about 90 seconds, they're going to realize they're a match made in heaven. And I've talked to both guys.
Match made in heaven, yeah.
I mean, I've talked to both guys about it, and they both are kind of like, yeah. I mean, we hit it off almost immediately. He brings instant credibility. Not only that, we can talk about this when we get to the defensive side, but he has a reputation for year one, I would say even week one, enhancements of defenses that are significant. And so if you've got a talented group that's not reaching its potential, you put Tom Allen in charge of that group, they're going to reach their potential where a lot of guys might take 2 or 3 years. Tom Allen's got a reputation for doing it year one. And so they've established some credibility, and it's also allowed Dabo in this changing landscape to go back to being more architect, more CEO. He's very hands-on in practice still. He's very hands-on with players and staff. That's not going to change. But as far as being able to delegate, set it and forget it with his assistant coaches, I think he's in the best spot he's been in quite some time.
That makes complete sense. And, one of the things you talked about is kind of the foundational principle or the big idea of really what Dabo built for the longest time, and maybe what ultimately led to the need to bring in some outside ideas was that idea of consistency and the idea of continuity from year to year and over the years, what am I trying to say? Over the years, just overall, I think that idea of continuity plays a huge role into where some of the expectations come for this Clemson team this year. I mean, I think it's fair to say that the expectations this year are higher than they have been in a number of recent years. Part of that is the continuity. This is year 3, not only for Garrett Riley, but also for Cade Klubnik as his starting quarterback. Klubnik seemed like he took some steps forward last year. Where are the areas that you're looking for him to take another step forward this year if Clemson is going to reach the potential and the expectations that a lot of people have for him?
That's a great question. To the expectations, 2021, the opener against Georgia, where Clemson lost 10-3, it was a significant wake-up call because that offense was absolutely dreadful, like could not move the ball in any way, shape, or form. I think it was like a guy fell down and he broke a tackle. It was the only way Clemson even got in scoring range in the game. So not since 21 have we seen Clemson have this kind of expectation. Going to 22, I think there was optimism because we saw Cade Klubnik play great against North Carolina in the ACC championship game. We saw him stub his toe against Tennessee, but we're thinking, okay, maybe that's a little bit of a blip on the radar. That Tennessee team was quite good. And it's Duke in the opener. What can go wrong? Well, what went wrong is they had over 500 yards and gagged all over themselves every time they got in scoring range with just the most hilarious turnovers. And that sort of defined the 2023 season for Clemson. And I think I said 22. It was going to the 23 season, Duke, 2 years ago. And, since then, that's kind of been the thing that Cade Klubnik's had to deal with is ball security and limiting the catastrophes. 2023, they're going to beat Florida State, and Phil Maffa blows a protection. Cade fumbles the ball, scoop and score. They lose the game in overtime. and Florida State goes on to an undefeated regular season. Clemson ends up, making more staff changes and having, existential questions about the program. So they weren't that far in 23, just in terms of the individual plays. But I would suggest to you that on offense, they needed Cade Klubnik to be comfortable in the leadership role. And I think that's something he's really grown in. You could tell when he got to campus a couple years ago, he was a little bit of a try-hard, like a golden retriever puppy. And he got after some teammates on the sidelines at times. And you could tell that some of that was hitting and some of it was missing. And there was a weird dynamic 2 years ago where like Will Shipley was really the yeller screamer and you really like he would get in guys' face, and then you had Cade kind of just happy-go-lucky, like almost way too excited, energetic. And it was a weird just concoction of energy on that side of the ball. I'm not saying it was wrong or they had issues, but it was not a focused energy because you felt like, the most vocal player was Shipley, and then you've got Klubnik, who's almost giving off a different vibe, a different energy. Last year, that seemed to channel. And some of that is you had a little bit of a quieter guy in the backfield in Maffa. You had young receivers for the most part that were sort of learning. And then you had offensive line sort of trying to grow and gel together. So it was Cade's opportunity to be the big personality in the room. I've talked to Cade a couple times this offseason. Very calm, cool, and collected outward demeanor. He said multiple times the same people that wanted him benched last year, which, by the way, this time was a bunch of Clemson fans. We were having Trent Pierman conversations. With Pierman, prefer walk-on, had some legit offers, like some G5 offers to go play quarterback out of high school at Daniel right up the road, and stayed and is a fine backup. But, like, he outplayed Cade in the spring game in 24. And so, a lot of people were going, hey, this guy stunk in 23. We don't need him as our quarterback. And so Klubnik has brought that up. A lot of people wanted me benched and didn't ever want me to play Clemson again and thought we were going to be terrible. Now they're saying I'm going to be great and we're going to be great, and I can't listen to that either. That's kind of – I think that's the biggest thing with Klubnik is the managing expectations between the ears is going to be big. The other thing is, and I think the stats will tell you a little bit of a different story. In fact, I would suggest to you that it's something I've really nailed down on this week based on a couple things that I've read and seen. Cade was an interception machine. Last year, he had just a handful of picks that he threw and played against some pretty good defenses and really did a better job taking care of the ball. A little bit of turnover luck in that, though. He fumbled 7 times on the season, only lost 1. That can't continue. If you told me that Cade Klubnik turned the ball over, I don't have the number, 7, 8, 9 times, whatever it was, last year, I'd say, that's better. And it was better. But if you fumble 7 times again this year and you're throwing, let's say, 7, 8 picks, that's 15 turnovers you're responsible for, man. And if you're going to be good enough to go to the playoff and compete for a national championship, your quarterback cannot be doing that. That just puts too much strain and stress on everybody else. And so I'm sort of looking for that, like just a little bit more of a cleaned up process in terms of ball handling, and then managing expectations between the years, trusting the playmakers. That's something Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence and Kelly Bryant between them, and Taj Boyd before him. I mean, I'm leaving people out, but that's something they did really, really well. Is they would play YOLO ball at times in situations where they knew their guy was going to make the play. It was less reckless and more confident. And so I think Cade can clean that up just a little bit and move a little bit more to that confidence spectrum when he's trying to let his guys make plays.
And I always feel like I need to give the little caveat that when we're talking about these things, these are the things that are the difference between being really good and being great, right? Like there's a pretty high floor here, I think, base case. And these are the differences between a team that's going to go 10-2 and at least be in Charlotte, probably win the ACC, versus a team that's like a top 2 seed in the playoff and, a favorite to win the national title. Like that's the level of difference that we're talking about, I think, in these kinds of things. Qualkins, we do these previews. A lot of times we're talking about, key places where there's roster turnover with these teams. For my money, there's very little with this Clemson program this year. They were number 1 nationally in returning production, according to Bill Connolly. Really, I mean, they lose Phil Maffa to the NFL. They lose, who was it on defense? Hang on, I had it right here. They had a defensive back, Barrett Carter, linebacker, and then RJ Mickens, the safety. Those guys to the NFL. Feels like that's basically it. Almost everybody else is back. Very few guys left to go to the transfer portal. So I guess my question to you is there anywhere with guys that are already familiar names where you expect a guy, someone, maybe a running back to fill Phil Maffa's shoes, someone to step up and be a bigger contributor this year than they were in prior years?
There are a couple places where people really have questions. One is safety, which Khalil Barnes, we found out he's the best safety by far. Can use him at nickel, can play in the box, can play in coverage. Really, I expect him to be just an animal in Tom Allen's defense. He's been out with an injury, and so you kind of looking around, going, all right, there's a lot of fine players here, but who are the standouts? I think that's a big question. One guy they're excited about in that position group is Ronan Hannafin, who came as a big wide receiver from the Northeast, Boston College, and Notre Dame were after him. And he ends up coming to Clemson late in a recruiting class as sort of the bottom guy, like a low 4-star type kid. He started playing safety in camp last year. They moved him over there. He played like 100 snaps, maybe a little less than that during the season. So he's actually had a full offseason and has really impressed Tom Allen, the new defensive coordinator. So that's a name I think to watch. Ricardo Jones back there is a really, really good player, just a sophomore though. And so that's a position where there are questions. Another guy that I think I think people in Clemson are sort of familiar because he flashed last year, but I think a lot of people nationally are going to have to see it for the first time is Ashton Hampton, the cornerback opposite Avion Terrell, son of a coach, really like physical presence, little more of a boundary corner type, I think. So I think you'll see him more in those situations. Can bump and run, can play some nickel and safety, like body type wise. Really, really, really exciting player because he's a playmaker, man. That freshman year, when he got his opportunities, he took advantage of them. On the offensive side of the ball, you're right, man. They return everything. They lose one offensive lineman, their left guard, Marcus Tate. They've got options to plug in there. And Dabo Swinney said they're going into camp with 7 starters. Now, it's a joke around here that when Dabo says we got 12 guys that can play on the offensive line, 12 guys that can help us, the real number is like 8. You basically shave a third off of that. I mean, Dabo, no, like the guy in an air cast is not going to help you. Okay, so like you always have to kind of shave off a third whenever Dabo says that. But he normally is talking about guys that can help you. This is the first time I can remember in a preseason press conference in July that he said they had 7 starters on the offensive line. He said their goal was to leave camp with 10 starters. So you've got some guys that can fill that role and guys that have played. They actually do have 7 returning offensive linemen who have started games for them, not just in the ether. I mean, juxtapose that with LSU, who had to portal a couple guys on, particularly the interior of their offensive line. They lost 4 guys to the NFL. They're probably going to start 2 green tackles, but the combined total starts for their offensive line at LSU is 16. Clemson's well over 100 starts at Clemson on the offensive line. So that system, that's together, that's all those things. I think that's really important. But the one position on the offensive side, we talk a lot about the passing game, running back. The number 1 running back right now is Adam Randall, who was a wide receiver. He was recruited as a 4-star wide receiver, in-state kid, highly popular among his teammates. He is big. He's like 6'3", 235, like really strong force. Dabo said, we realized that the best thing that Adam Randall did was whatever happened after he caught the football. So we said, let's just get him the ball quicker. And so they put him in the backfield. He had a 40-yard run against Texas. Now, he hasn't had 5 carries. He's literally had 4 carries for like 41 yards or something in his collegiate career. So that is a problem spot. They have talent there. David Eziamame is a talented a second-year player who struggled with ball security last year. Has really cleaned it up. He got stronger. Gideon Davidson is the future. I mean, you want to talk about a bright-eyed, like salt-of-the-earth kid from Virginia. He was born, I think, in Ghana and adopted and brought to America. Awesome, awesome story. Great person, already beloved by his teammates. That guy's the truth. They say the Clemson staff and C.J. Spiller said this. They think he's the best running back in the country coming into college, and he just fits hand in glove with C.J. Spiller and with what Dabo's doing. But he's just a freshman. And do you put him out there against LSU? Do you put him? I mean, people are talking about LSU. To me, Joey, the week 3 game at Georgia Tech, like, do you put him out there against Georgia Tech on the road? I mean, that Atlanta's where Trevor Lawrence made his mark, but that was a bad Georgia Tech team. This
Mm-hmm.
is like, I mean, this is a good Georgia Tech team that they're playing against. So it's not like you have, as some other Clemson teams have, yeah, you got a tough opener, but then you sort of have this on-ramp situation. The schedule is sort of evenly spaced with fairly difficult games for the most part until you bookend it at South Carolina. And so, are there opportunities to grow up these young guys? The running back room, look, the stuff that we're hearing about Adam Randall is just stupid. Like, it can't be true. Like Derrick Henry, Bo Scarborough, no. Like, we're hearing some of that, and I can't get behind it. I can't get my head around that. But to your point, there aren't that many places where there aren't significant periods or exclamation marks returning from this team. And one more thing on this question, as we're talking about running back and safety, and maybe a little bit of depth at linebacker and corner and things like that. I mean, in this era of college football, I remind our audience all the time that you don't have to win the Heisman by being as good as every Heisman winner. You don't have to win the national championship by being as good as every national champion. You just have to be the best in that season.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many teams with major question marks who are among the favorites in the country. The coaches poll comes out, and 6 of the top 8 teams in the coaches poll are breaking in brand new starting quarterbacks. Not just to you, not just to your program, but to college football. These are new, like, have never been, have they started a couple games, Arch Manning? Yeah, but they have never been the guy. The only 2 top 8 teams that have a returning starter at quarterback are Penn State and Clemson. And if you go down, like, LSU's the third, I think there's 11 of the top 25 in the coaches poll that have brand new starting quarterbacks to college football. That is a crazy amount of question at the most important position. So that's why I think people are looking at a toughest schedule that Clemson's had on paper in years. And they're looking at some of these other questions and they're going, yeah, but like everybody has questions, and you don't have questions at quarterback, and you don't have questions at receiver, and you don't have questions in terms of talent on defense. And you have 2 very good coordinators, and you have a head coach who's been there and done that.
Yep. Yeah. It's like you don't have to be as good as the 2018 Clemson team to add another national title to the trophy case, is kind of what you're saying here.
That's exactly right. I mean, to me, that's the standard to which all teams are measured. And there have been some good teams that hadn't won. I think the 2015 Clemson team was quite good. I think the 2019 Clemson team might have been better than 2016. They went 14-0 and ran into LSU. I mean, Trevor Lawrence, keep that in mind. Trevor Lawrence, Clemson, they won 29 consecutive games over 2018 and 19. So that's the stand. Like, that's a crazy standard.
Mm-hmm.
Dabo was actually talking about this earlier this week. He mentioned Amari Adams, who's a very talented freshman, in-state kid, high 4, low 5 star, depending on where you look. A lot of people after him. He stuck with Clemson, and he's a defensive tackle. And he said Amari Adams is the kind of guy that causes problems for other players. And he compared him to Sammy Watkins and C.J. Spiller and Christian Wilkins and Dexter Lawrence and Trevor Lawrence, because he's like, these guys are not normal when they show up.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that's the standard at Clemson. It's an incredibly high bar. You can't just be great. You have to be great and pummel people in order to put yourself in that category. But I do think this team has a lot of ingredients to be excited about.
I'm still laughing at that Adam Randall comparison to Derrick Henry. I feel like that's a little bit like looking at a baseball player. Like, he kind of reminds me of Barry Bonds. Like, that's not a fair comparison to put on anybody. But
no, it's dumb. The guy rushes for 750, and it's going to be a disappointment because he didn't go for 1,500. Yeah, nah, man, it's crazy.
Well, just quickly on the offense, one more question. You talked about the depth and the experience on the offensive line. I know that there's a young, really talented receiver core, all of it coming back. You mentioned the questions about the running back position, but obviously getting Cade Klubnik back is a huge advantage. Is there any concern in your mind, or do you feel like this is really the opportunity where we should see, I guess, what I'll call the final form of the Garrett Riley offense as it builds here into year 3?
I think the concern would be the run game. I mean, you look at Clemson last year, the last 5 games, that would be against FBS, or last 4 games, sorry, against FBS competition, last 5 overall. That would be the Pitt game, the South Carolina game, the SMU game, and the Texas game. They averaged like 82 rushing yards a game. Before that, in the first 9 games against FBS competition, they were pushing 200. Well, what happened? Well, Phil Mappa's arm started to fall off. He basically was it's the Monty Python sketch, 'tis only a flesh wound. And the guy's out there just, I mean, he literally, like, he couldn't block, he couldn't run, whatever. And because the rest of the room was not ready to contribute in the eyes of the coaches, they just sort of were throwing him out there. I mean, that's why, like, he had 2 carries against Texas rolled out. That's why Randall's even getting the ball in that game. They moved him because they had a need. They legitimately only trusted one guy, and that guy was not trustworthy anymore. And so I think that the reason I bring that up is because, there are people who are saying, well, wait a minute. Clemson was sort of fortunate to beat Pittsburgh. They were definitely fortunate to beat SMU. They lost to South Carolina and Texas. Why are people so excited about this offense? They scored 14 against South Carolina. They were down 14 points against Texas before they sort of rallied in the second half. What gives? What are we talking about here? And I think it's the recognition that this offense looked markedly better in terms of downfield passing game with young weapons who are all back. There are 5 guys in the receiver core right now that have started games at receiver for Clemson, and a 6th, Tristan Smith, is good enough. He's the body type they haven't had. He's a transfer, 6'5", sort of a JUCO FCS transfer up. Really, really talented, super fluid. Reminds you a little bit of, like, from a Clemson standpoint, like Martavis Bryant, like a taller, less athletic, probably T. Higgins, like Mike Williams. Those sort of like box out, go up and get it. Nuke Hopkins when he was younger and a little bit skinnier. Like that's the kind of body type that we're talking about that Clemson hasn't had. And so you've got all these pieces in place, but they couldn't run the ball last year. So they threw it without any semblance of run game. Now you're thinking, okay, we're developed enough. Offensive line's got all this returning. Now we can sort of go because people don't just know that if they run it, they can have a light box and still stop us. And then we're behind the chain, so we kind of have to throw it every down. There is this sort of, at least the veneer of balance. And I think that's what Garrett Riley wants. When he was brought in a couple years ago, they sort of referred to the offense as the dirt raid because he wants to run the ball. It's not just chuck it around first, second, third down. It's not the pure, unadulterated Mike Leach system. But I think you'd be crazy not to want to throw the ball in this offense. In fact, I think a horizontal passing game is better than a run a lot of times, given the guys that are there, as long as the wide receivers block and you get some tight ends involved in that out wide. I think the horizontal passing game, if you're throwing in Antonio Williams, who's going to play in the NFL, you're throwing to Tyler Brown, who was hurt last year, was a freshman All-American 2 years ago. You're throwing to TJ Moore and Bryant Wesco and Cole Turner. Like, those are dudes, man. Mm-hmm. And so they have lots of capability to make things very, very difficult on opposing defenses. Not that you don't know, it's not as simple as run or pass, but with those types of receivers and that type of a passing game and this type of a signal caller and protection, they could throw it to anybody anywhere on the field. You can't even really fit Clemson's receivers into archetypes because Antonio Williams is probably going to start in the slot. The guy can play outside. He's played outside his whole career. I think that gives a little bit of an embarrassment of riches to Garrett Riley. And, maybe they're missing that seam option, the Jake Brenningstool replacement at tight end. Not sure it matters because if you got Tristan Smith out there that's making one-on-one catches, you got Moore and Wesco and Williams and Brown that can do all the things. I think you can pretty much do whatever you want. That's the situation Garrett Riley finds himself in.
Talk about getting the ball to the perimeter, getting those guys out there. I've heard much worse strategies than forcing opposing secondaries to have to tackle. Like that works for me. I've heard much worse ideas, especially if you've got some big, strong receivers out there, making it difficult on them. We'll say. Wanted to ask real quick, Qualk. You talk about all the pieces coming back on the defense. Last year they finished 29th in SP Plus in defense, which is obviously top 30. That's pretty good, but I think again for this team to be where they want to go, they probably need to be more in that top 10 range. You talk about Tom Allen making huge improvements here. Obviously, all the pieces coming back. Do you imagine that there are schematic changes that are going to really be the what's responsible for that improvement, or do you imagine that's more just emphasis on fundamentals? Where do you think that improvement really stems from with all these same pieces back in place?
2 things. Tom Allen, reputation for pretty simple defenses. I mean, Brent Venables is freaking running the gamut. Like by the end of the year, they put in everything. Wes Goodwin came in, like every coordinator does, says we're going to simplify things a little bit, play a little faster. Didn't look simple. They didn't look like they played faster. They were out of position, didn't tackle. So Tom Allen, what they're going to do, he said we're going to be the best tackling team in America. I believe him because I watched what he did at South Florida. I watched what he did at Indiana. These were significantly less talented units than what Clemson has, but these were underperforming units that became high performing units. Not elite, but they weren't going to be elite at South Florida or Indiana. They just got them to the point where they no longer were the reason that they were losing games. And last year, the inability to run fit and tackle was the reason that Clemson lost to Louisville. It was the reason that Clemson lost to South Carolina, those two games in particular. I would argue tackling is the reason they lost to Georgia if they had scored a few more points. They scored 6 or something, so or 3, I don't even remember. It was bad. The offense was dreadful that game, and the defense kind of just wore down, but they didn't tackle very well. And so just being where you're supposed to be and tackling is more important to Tom Allen than running super complex stuff, especially when he has this caliber of players. He likes bump and run coverage. You know why? Because if you got corners that can cover, then it makes everybody else's job really easy, because then you just sort of play how you're going to play. You don't have to do complex stuff and disguise zones and things like that. Obviously, he's going to do some of that. But if you've got corners with the capability to bump and run, and you've got a defensive line that can get after the quarterback, then it's just going to free up other people to make plays. You're winning one-on-one battles. And I think that's the thing that's got people most excited. The other thing is Tom Allen's a little more of a CEO defensive coordinator because of some of the rule changes. Ben Boulware, former Clemson linebacker who gave quite an impassioned speech in 2016 on the podium after the first national championship win for this group. He is now the linebackers coach. He sort of went from intern to assistant, now is a full-time coach, and has really made quite an impact. He and Thomas Allen, Tom's son, who's a Ben Boulware type player at Indiana, and they're very similar. They are sort of heading up that linebacker room. And so it gives Tom Allen a little more of a CEO opportunity over the defense. I think that is nothing but good, because I think the Ben Boulware energy is something this program really needed. Wes Goodwin, very laid back, very low key. It's hard when your leader is low key if you want to be high key. And I think there were some issues with that last year as well. With some of the other assistants, if you feel like the lower assistants, if you're having to set the tone that your boss is really just not equipped to set, then that's kind of a problem. Now you routinely hear Tom Allen talking in practice over the microphone. Like you're more likely to hear him than Dabo sometimes in practice. The guy never stops talking. And he's very clear. I think his players really respond well to him. And this should be a much better unit. Bill Conley gave a stat in a piece I read the other day. And the run number, it was like 87th or something, yards per carry allowed. That's dreadful. That's like Clemson hadn't had a run defense that bad in like 20 years, okay? But when you take sacks out, Clemson's like 113th in the country in yards per carry allowed. They're the only team that Georgia ran for 5 yards a carry against last year, and Georgia ran for 6. They gave up 6 yards a carry or more to all 3 of the SEC teams they faced and to Louisville, and as I say, gave up 300 yards rushing to the Citadel. That's a major problem. There is no way that Clemson's defense is not significantly better in that regard this year, and that should lead to a couple more wins like that, just right off the bat, if you can stop the run at all in some of these games.
Yeah, it's a valid point. And they're going to have a schedule that's going to allow them to, I think the way you look at it is prove it. And, you mentioned it's not easy. I see a win total in Vegas. I was thinking it would probably be 10.5. I think I saw it at 9.5. And as much as people seem like they kind of want to rush to the over, it's like, I look at a number of these spots that it's like, I need to see it before we can really write these as W's in pen. LSU to start the year. You mentioned South Carolina in Columbia to end the year. So you bookend it with a couple of SEC teams. I'm not going to tell you couldn't lose either of those games. And then I look at, down the line, Troy at Georgia Tech, you mentioned could be an interesting spot on the road. Syracuse at North Carolina. Who knows what that looks like? At Boston College, maybe. SMU, they were a playoff team last year. Duke, FSU at Louisville also could be treacherous. They beat you last year and it was pretty convincing. So I think that there are a number of opportunities for potential losses here. Like this is, as you mentioned, this is a pretty tough schedule as things go for Clemson, a team that can't play Clemson. And so I think it really gives them the opportunity to prove it, is the way that I have to think about it for this year.
Yeah, it is sort of interesting that with all the strengths and even some of the question marks, you look at that schedule, you go, oh man, boy, it's gonna be real tough to run the table. And so you have this dichotomy, and you mentioned it. It's hard to square that Clemson's win total is 9.5. Now, listen, if you're with that over, I mean, I think it's like minus 175 or something like that. Like it's, you're probably not even going to bet that. It's not even really worth it for the payout you're going to get. And so
Exactly.
it's probably a stay away, but there's a reason they have not moved it, that these books have not moved it. And it's because you look, for the first time in a while, Clemson's probably going to be less than a touchdown favorite in 2 home games with LSU and with SMU. Unless SMU is worse, which I mean, I think there's you could argue that with the line of scrimmage turnover that they've had and things like that. You could argue that SMU, like they lost a bunch of receivers and all that. You could argue they're going to be a little worse. But those are teams that can come in your building and beat you on paper. We're not even talking about Syracuse, who is quite a good program, and they've got the toughest schedule God or man has ever seen. And I don't think they're going to lose all the games we're sure they're going to lose. Like they're playing 6 teams that went to the playoff last year, if I counted that right. 6. I mean, that's absurd. And I think almost all of them are, if not all of them, are away from home. That's ridiculous. Are they really going to go 0-6 in though? Like I got a little more respect for Fran Brown than that. And then you mentioned the road games. Now Clemson has owned Columbia, South Carolina. Jake Bentley had a big game at Clemson offensively. I think the last time South Carolina did anything offensively against Clemson there was like 2015. I think got shut out in 17 or almost shut out. 19, they got shut out. Like Goodwin, I think, shut them out. Or so, like they've been shut out or almost shut out just about every time that they played Clemson in the last decade there. So it's been kind of a weird deal where like South Carolina's actually played better at Clemson than they have at home against Clemson. I remember when I was growing up, the road team won like 5 in a row, and right now the road team has won 4 in a row in the Clemson South Carolina rivalry. So that's a little bit of a tricky spot there, as you said. I'm not as worried about Louisville. That was one of the dumbest games I've ever seen. Clemson was going like glacial pace offense down multiple scores and like dink and dunking the ball. And the crowd, it was one of the most frustrated crowds I've ever heard at Memorial Stadium because it was like the team was it was like a hologram of a team that was playing a game in a different building on top of the game that was happening. It was like they were totally detached. A lot of frustration on the sideline that game. And like I say, Louisville's got a great run game, but they're not going to just blow Clemson off the ball like they did last year. At Georgia Tech is the one I'm most worried about because that is the game that I think you get the least credit for winning that is the most capable of being a loss for you. Brent Key's done a really good job. You know this, Joey. Brent Key's done a really good job of trying to make Bobby Dodd Stadium a little tougher for teams to go play and win. That has traditionally been for Clemson and Georgia a neutral site, if not a road environment for Georgia Tech because the fans travel so well there. So that's always a little bit of a factor. And Clemson has really not had a problem at Bobby Dodd Stadium in recent memory. It used to be a real household like the 2000s and late 90s. Georgia Tech kind of had Clemson's number, especially there. But this is it's a physical line of scrimmage team with a very good quarterback that can annoy the crap out of you. He can get 10 yards in 1 inch. A little bit of like for Clemson band, a little bit like Connor Shaw with South Carolina, just kind of like that. Like he's not going to blow you away, but he's making all these plays. Haynes is really good. Love the receivers with the kid they got from Florida Atlantic, FIU, Eric Rivers. I think he's going to be a stud. And then defensively, I think they're just getting a little better. So should Clemson win that game? Yeah. I mean, they're probably more likely to win that game than maybe LSU at home or at South Carolina or at Louisville. But to me, that's the tricky spot because it's 2 games after SMU. It's early in the season. It's a giant killer type program, and you have to go to their place. It's your first true road game. And I'm interested to see how Clemson deals with that test. This is the type of schedule that Clemson was playing like 10 years ago. People don't realize this. In 2016, Clemson won 8 ranked games. That flies in the face of all the ACC narratives about, oh, man, you just got there because you didn't play anybody. I mean, yeah, that counts playoffs, but like in the regular season, Clemson had to go through Lamar Jackson. They had to beat Auburn on the road. They won several, I think 4 or maybe 5 ranked games in the regular season in order to get to the national championship game. So that's a big challenge for this team, is navigating that schedule to me. Now, are they going to be favored in every game? Probably. But it's hard to go unscathed even when you're favored in every game, and specifically when you can get tripped up this many times.
You talk about that 2016 season. That was the first year we did this podcast, and man, that was a great year for the ACC. A lot of really good teams. Clemson was, I think, pretty definitively the best team in the country, won the national title. Lamar wins the Heisman. I mean, oh man, bring me back. That's nostalgia right there. That's good stuff.
Pittsburgh beat them. Pittsburgh scored 45, 43, beat them at home in November.
The super fun Matt Canada Pitt team. That was a lot of fun. Man, what a time. What a time. Qualk, this has been awesome. This has been a time. This has been great. Really appreciate you coming on as always. Looking forward to seeing kind of what Clemson is able to do this season. Do you want to tell the people real quick where they can go find your stuff?
Yeah, we are on 105.5 FM, 97.5 FM in Greenville, Spartanburg, all the way from the Georgia border to the North Carolina border and upstate South Carolina. I've co-host Out of Bounds noon to 3 Monday through Friday. And I'll be doing the pregame show for Clemson football 6 hours before kickoff to 3 hours before. I'll be hosting that, and then doing halftime and postgame for football, as well as some other duties. You can hit me up on. By the way, you can find our website, theroarfm.com, and you can hit me up on Twitter at QualkTalk. I'm also on Instagram at QualkTalk as well.
Well, for the people who didn't know before listening to this episode, you can clearly tell that Qualk very well informed and also very entertaining to listen to. So highly recommend going and checking him out there before Clemson games, or on a regular weekday afternoon if you're in the area there in upstate South Carolina. Qualk, this has been awesome. Really appreciate it. I would love to have you back on sometime soon. All right.
Love to do it, Joey. Always great to be with you guys. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to get out of here. We got some more team previews. We're going to come back and record, so keep it tuned here, youtube.com/@the-ACC Football Podcast. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you go get your podcast. Please hit the subscribe button. We would really, really appreciate that. But until next time, for Mr. Will Qualkinbush, I am Joey Weber. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll talk to you again very, very soon. Until then, go Tigers and go ACC.